Hey everyone, welcome to Sip and Talk. Today I am jumping straight to the point because our inbox got flooded by an email from a listener, one of our fellow Sip and Talkers. They threw a super hardcore, even slightly sensitive question at us. What exactly is the relationship between the Chinese Communist Party and the historical Chinese Soviet Republic? Is modern China essentially just the ghost of the Soviet Union left in East Asia?
This view is incredibly sharp, but it also crashes right into the hardest core arguments of modern political history and geopolitics.
Exactly. So today, we are going to lay out the hard historical truths for you. We aren't taking sides or pushing propaganda. We are going to unpack the historical context, political science theories, and the underlying logic of the CCP and KMT's evolution. We'll go from the 1931 separatist regime in Ruijin all the way to the clash of three entirely different sets of logic: revolutionary legitimacy versus state legitimacy versus de facto control.
The information density and logical rigor today will be very high. History is never linear, and as you listen, you absolutely do not need to accept our deductions wholesale. We highly encourage you to verify with authoritative historical records as you listen, and even drop a comment to challenge our takes.
That's right. Grab your coffee or your whiskey. The logic today is seriously hard-hitting. Let's step right into the deep waters of history and political science.
Okay, so I think the best place to start here is really just by defining our terms, right? Because the word Soviet, it carries so much psychological baggage for us.
Oh, absolutely. Tons of it.
Right. Like if you're listening to this, your brain probably immediately jumps to, the Cold War, the Iron Curtain, maybe nuclear standoffs in the 80s.
Yes, the classic Hollywood villain era.
Exactly. But if we strip all of that away, what is the actual mechanical definition of a Soviet?
Well, in its purest original Russian form, dating way back to the early 20th century, the word Soviet simply means council or representative assembly. And honestly, the theoretical blueprint for this was actually quite beautiful. It was engineered to be the ultimate, bottom-up political structure.
Meaning the power originates directly from the streets, basically.
Precisely. The core Marxist-Leninist pitch was that everyday citizens, the factory workers sweating on the assembly line, the rural farmers, the frontline soldiers, they don't need a wealthy parliament or, a distant monarch.
Right, yeah.
They can manage their own local affairs just by electing peers to a localized council. And that local council is a Soviet.
So it's essentially a hyper-local town hall system, people just managing their own zip codes and workplaces.
In theory, yes. And those local town halls were supposed to elect regional representatives who would then elect national representatives. It was pitched to the global working class as the truest possible form of the people are the masters.
Sounds great on paper.
Right. But here's where we have to look at how mechanisms actually function in reality, because the historical implementation of the Soviet structure hit a massive paradox almost immediately.
Well, yeah, because you can't really run a cohesive industrialized nation state if thousands of local town halls are all voting to go, completely different directions. Power naturally consolidates.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And in this system, it consolidated with terrifying speed. The structure rapidly inverted into a rigid top-down hierarchy.
A total 180.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Sure, the grassroots citizens still went to the ballot box to elect their local representatives, but the moment those representatives took office, they were structurally bound to obey orders from their superiors.
All right.
And those superiors answered directly to the party apparatus. The party answered exclusively to the Central Committee.
So basically, the visual on paper looks like power is flowing up from the grassroots, but the actual operational reality is that all the commands are just dropping straight down from the ceiling.
That's a great way to put it. It creates the illusion of decentralized democratic representation, while the machinery behind the curtain is entirely centralized and, authoritarian. And that specific, centralized political machinery was actively packaged and exported globally by Moscow through an organization called the Comintern and the Communist International.
Okay, which brings us to the mountains of Jiangxi province in southern China, November 7th, 1931. And I actually want to pause on that date because November 7th is the exact anniversary of the Russian October Revolution.
Oh, yeah. They knew exactly what they were doing.
Right. They weren't exactly trying to hide their ideological inspiration.
Not even a little bit. On that specific anniversary, deep in rural territory, the Chinese Soviet Republic was officially established in a town called Ruijin.
Wow.
And the man elected as the chairman of its Central Executive Committee was Mao Zedong.
You know, looking at this through a modern lens, sitting here in the tech era, This entire situation sounds identical to, like, a rogue startup launching a parallel rival product right inside the physical territory of an established monopoly.
Wait, a startup? How do you mean? Break down the startup analogy for me.
Well, think about the landscape back then, right? The nationalists, the KMT, they're sitting in their capital in Nanjing. They are the established, recognized monopoly.
Right, they have the scale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They have the international backing. They claim to be the sole legal government of the Republic of China. And then this startup in Ruzhen just violently pops into existence.
Out of nowhere, essentially.
Right. But they aren't just a bunch of guys hiding in a cave writing manifestos. They're shipping a full competing product.
They absolutely were. I mean, they had the whole infrastructure.
Yeah. They drafted their own independent constitution. They fielded their own military force, the Red Army. They executed radical land reform policies, redistributing property. They set up their own tax code.
Didn't they have their own money, too?
Yes.
Yeah.
They even printed their own physical currency. I was reading that they actually minted coins and printed bills with Vladimir Lenin's face on them, circulating right there in rural China.
Man, it is a brilliant way to frame it because it wasn't a protest movement. It was a completely rival political operating system. But what is truly fascinating here is how the framing of this exact historical action completely flips depending on who holds the microphone.
Oh, absolutely. Because if you hand the microphone to the nationalist government in Nanjing, they aren't looking at a startup. They're looking at outright treason.
Exactly. The nationalists labeled this armed separatism. Their argument was highly legalistic and nationalistic. They were like, look around, we are in the middle of a massive national crisis. The Japanese Empire is invading our sovereign territory, and meanwhile, you are building a state within a state.
Yeah, you're distracting us from the real threat.
Right. They basically say you are treasonous rebels actively sabotaging the nation from the inside.
But if you walk over to Ruzhen and hand the microphone to the communists, their argument completely ignores the legal framework.
Completely.
They say, your laws don't matter because you are a corrupt bourgeois monopoly. You are actively oppressing the peasantry. We aren't rebels. We are a revolutionary base. We are the true representatives of the working class.
It's just two groups looking at the exact same plot of land, but operating in entirely different realities.
But wait, if they are speaking completely different languages, like one arguing the law, the other arguing morals, how do they actually resolve who has the right to rule? I mean, they can't just yell at each other forever. There has to be an underlying logic of power they are appealing to.
And there is. Political science actually breaks this down into three distinct pillars of legitimacy. If you want to understand anything about how states function, survive, or, collapse, you really have to understand these three pillars.
Okay, let's unpack these, because this framework blew my mind when I first dug into it. What is the first logic?
So logic number one is revolutionary legitimacy.
Yeah.
This pillar is entirely future-oriented. It basically asks the question, by what right do I overthrow you?
Okay. And the answer relies entirely on taking the moral high ground and claiming historical destiny. It argues that the current system is so profoundly unjust, so oppressive to the common person, that breaking its laws isn't a crime. It is a moral imperative to liberate the oppressed and build a better future.
Which is an incredibly powerful narrative when you have literally nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a massive trap hidden inside revolutionary legitimacy.
Oh, the memory switch. I love this concept.
Yes. Go ahead. Explain it.
Okay, so if you really think about it, before a revolution wins, overthrowing the government is painted as this righteous, heroic duty. You are a freedom fighter.
Exactly.
But the absolute second that revolutionary group actually wins, takes the capital, and becomes the state, overthrowing the government magically transforms into illegal subversion.
It is the ultimate political pivot. When you are the insurgent, revolution is a virtue. When you are the incumbent, revolution is treason.
So convenient.
Right. Which explains why the CCP relied entirely on revolutionary legitimacy in the 1930s.
Yeah.
But today, they heavily guard their state power and view any new revolutionary talk as an existential threat to national stability.
Which brings us perfectly to the second pillar. Because if the communists are claiming they have the moral right to burn the system down, how do the nationalists defend themselves? They can't just argue morals, they have to argue the law.
Right, which is logic number two, state legitimacy or constitutional legitimacy. If the first one is future-oriented, this one is strictly past-oriented.
Got it.
It asks, who legally represents this country? This relies on constitutional continuity, international treaties, and diplomatic recognition.
And this was the nationalist government's strongest card by far. I mean, they could trace their lineage straight back to the founding of the Republic of China in 1912.
Yep.
They had the foreign embassies located in Nanjing. They were recognized by the League of Nations. They essentially held the official notarized deed to the country.
But then you have logic number 3, which doesn't care about your future morals and honestly doesn't care about your past paperwork either.
The present-oriented one.
Exactly. It is entirely present-oriented. De facto control.
Meaning, who is actually running the show right now on the ground?
Exactly. This goes straight back to the sociologist Max Weber's classic definition of a state. Weber argued that the state is the entity that successfully claims the monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory.
So whoever has the guns.
Whoever has the guns, collects the taxes, and administers the daily life of a specific area is the de facto ruler. Period.
Let me put this in everyday terms so we can really visualize how these three clash.
Go for it.
Imagine 3 people fiercely arguing over a house, all right? Person A is standing on the front lawn waving the original notarized property deed in the air. That's state legitimacy. That's the nationalists in Nanjing screaming, "We own this."
But person B is standing right next to them without any paperwork. Instead, they are shouting to the neighborhood that the current landlord is an abusive slumlord, and they have arrived to liberate the tenants and fix the plumbing.
Right, that's revolutionary legitimacy. Meanwhile, person C has entirely bypassed the argument on the lawn, kicked in the back door, changed all the locks, set up camp in the living room with a shotgun, and is currently collecting rent directly from the tenants.
And that is de facto control.
Yeah.
And de facto control is the ultimate trump card in geopolitics. If you collect the rent, but the guy with the deed calls the police, and the police can't remove you, the deed becomes a worthless piece of paper.
Wow.
In the 1930s, the guy with the deed was yelling at the guy screaming about tenant rights, and they were talking completely past each other because they were operating on completely different logical pillars.
But how does that squatter with the shotgun, who in the early 30s only controlled a tiny fraction of the house, actually end up taking over the entire massive estate?
Right.
Because it wasn't a sudden overnight coup. It was a brutal, methodical, geographic progression. The strategy is often described as moving from a point to a line to a surface.
It's the perfect way to trace the map. So let's start with the point phase, which runs roughly from 1931 to 1934. Okay, that Soviet-backed startup we just talked about in Ruzhin, that was a literal point on the map. And it was heavily subsidized and theoretically directed by the Comintern in Moscow. They sent advisors, funds, and military doctrines.
But holding a single isolated point is incredibly dangerous when the monopoly comes looking for you.
Which they did. The nationalists brought the hammer down. They organized massive military encirclement campaigns. Eventually, they smashed that base in Ruzhin, forcing the communists to abandon their point and flee for their lives.
Which triggers the long phase, right, covering roughly 1935 to 1945.
Yep, exactly.
This period includes the Long March, which was, let's be real, less of a march and more of a devastating military retreat where they suffered catastrophic losses.
Absolutely brutal.
But it also includes the Sino-Japanese War. And there is a brilliant piece of political pragmatism that happens during this time regarding their branding.
Oh, the rebranding was a masterstroke of survival. During the Second United Front, when they ostensibly paused the Civil War to team up with the nationalists and fight the Japanese invasion, the CCP quietly dropped the highly Russian Soviet branding.
Well, because it makes total sense. If your entire country is being brutally invaded by a foreign power, having your local government named after a Russian political structure just screams that you are a proxy for a different foreign power.
Yeah, not exactly a patriotic look.
It is terrible optics for nationalism.
It was a massive political liability. So they changed the nomenclature. They started calling their controlled territories border regions. For example, the Shaanxi-Gansu-Ningxia border region.
It sounds so bureaucratic, infinitely more localized and unthreatening.
But functionally. They weren't just administrating. They were using guerrilla warfare to connect their surviving isolated dots into long, sprawling lines of military and political control across the rural countryside, completely surrounding the cities the nationalists held.
Setting up the infrastructure for the final phase, the surface. From 1946 to 1949, after World War II ends, the Civil War resumes in full force. But the nationalists' state legitimacy is crumbling because their economy is experiencing hyperinflation.
They completely lose de facto control of the money supply.
Right. And those lines the communists built, they sweep across the map, blanketing the entire country. The nationalist government retreats across the strait to Taiwan, and in 1949, the People's Republic of China is established in Beijing.
The squatter, who started in a single room with a shotgun, now holds the actual deed, claims the moral revolutionary high ground, and wields absolute de facto control over the entire mainland.
Man. Let's be clear, though, before we move on, the CCP did not invent China.
No, not at all.
Right. Like, if we look at the timeline, China is an ancient civilization. The Republic of China, the ROC, started in 1912. And the CCP started in 1921 as just a small revolutionary party inside that existing framework. They evolved from a political party to a local regime to a national government.
Exactly. The historical continuity is important. Which actually brings us right back to our listeners' core question.
The big one.
Yeah. If their political DNA originated with Moscow's funding, the Comintern's directives, and literally calling themselves a Soviet republic, is today's PRC simply the ghost of the Soviet Union haunting East Asia?
This is one of the most fiercely debated topics in modern political science. Let's look at the argument that says, yes, it is absolutely a ghost.
Okay, let's hear it.
The scholars making this argument point directly to the architectural blueprint of the state. In 1991, the Soviet Union formally collapsed. The flag came down in Moscow. But the institutional design, it survived perfectly intact in Beijing.
We're talking about the deep structural plumbing of the government here. Things like the nomenklatura system.
Yes, exactly. The nomenklatura is the mechanism where the party maintains absolute, unquestioned authority over all personnel appointments across the entire country.
And we aren't just talking about mayors and governors, right?
Yeah, not at all. We are talking about university presidents, newspaper editors, and the heads of major corporations.
Wow.
And you combine that with democratic centralism, where internal debate is allowed behind closed doors, but the absolute second a decision is made, unquestioning obedience is required.
Right.
Plus the massive propaganda machines, what the Soviets called agitprop, combining agitation and propaganda to shape public reality.
So if you take an X-ray of the system, the skeletal structure of a Leninist party state is undeniably present.
I hear that, but I have to push back because I lean heavily toward the opposing argument. No, it's a mutant theory.
A mutant. Okay, explain.
Because the ghost theory completely ignores how much they've evolved. The USSR fell apart primarily because it chained itself to a rigid, stagnant, centrally planned economy. They couldn't adapt to the modern world.
That's true.
Yeah.
China watched that collapse in real time, took aggressive notes on what went wrong, and then did something unprecedented. They grafted market capitalism directly onto their Leninist political frame.
It was a staggering evolutionary leap. And furthermore, the idea that they were just a compliant Moscow proxy ignores the entire Sino-Soviet split.
Right.
Like, if you are listening to this and thinking, wait, didn't China and Russia hate each other during the Cold War?
Yeah.
You are absolutely right.
They had a bitter ideological falling out in the 50s and 60s. They practically went to war over border disputes at Zhenbao Island. They kicked out the Soviet advisors and aggressively carved their own sovereign path.
Which is exactly why when we, as Americans, look at the geopolitical board today, when we pass our U.S. tech regulations like the CHIPS Act, and we formulate our foreign policies, we struggle so hard to categorize them.
We really do.
We are trying to contain an unprecedented hybrid. Sometimes you see politicians in Washington, and I mean the politicians trying to score quick sound bites, pushing policies that treat this like a simple Cold War rerun. They think embargoes will work the exact same way they did on the Soviets, and they are missing the historical context entirely.
They are trying to fight a 20th century ghost, but they are actually facing 21st century digital Leninism.
Digital Leninism. Let's unpack that term because it sounds like a cyberpunk dystopian novel, but it is very real. How does it actually function on the ground compared to the old Soviet model?
Think about how the old Soviet Union maintained control. They relied on human informants, physical paper dossiers, KGB agents manually tracking dissidents.
Lots of paperwork.
Lots of it. It was clunky, prone to human error, and massively resource-intensive. Digital Leninism replaces that analog friction with cutting-edge technology.
So instead of relying on a human informant to report if you're attending, say, unsanctioned meetings,
the state simply integrates omnipresent facial recognition cameras with your digital wallet and social media footprint.
wow.
The control mechanism is automated by algorithms. If you step out of line, the system doesn't necessarily need to send armed agents to your door. It can automatically freeze your ability to buy a high-speed train ticket or restrict your access to financial services. That is how they digitize Lenin's control apparatus.
And it's not just tech, is it? They've fused that Marxist-Leninist structure with thousands of years of traditional Chinese statecraft. Like, they leaned heavily into legalism.
Right. And for those who might not know, legalism is an ancient Chinese political philosophy that emerged centuries before Christ.
Way back.
Yeah. It argues that people are fundamentally self-interested, so you cannot rely on moral virtue to govern. Instead, you must rely on strict, absolute laws and harsh punishments to maintain control of the state.
So they combined ancient legalist tradition, Soviet Leninist structure, and modern Silicon Valley tech. Plus, they fundamentally shifted the end goal. It's no longer about funding a global communist revolution. It's entirely focused on Chinese national rejuvenation.
So how do you visualize a system that complex? I often use a martial arts metaphor.
Oh, I love a good metaphor. Let's hear it.
China isn't the lingering ghost of the Soviet master. China is the student who took the master's sacred martial arts manual, cropped out half the theoretical pages, scribbled in their own brutal, localized street fighting techniques, kicked the master out of the dojo entirely, and became the Grand Master themselves.
I see what you're saying, but doesn't that metaphor imply they completely discarded the Soviet economic manual?
How so?
Well, because if you look at their market today, state-owned enterprises still heavily dominate strategic sectors like energy and banking. They didn't throw out the master's moves entirely, they just execute them with better conditioning.
You know, that is a very fair critique. You're right, they didn't abandon state control. They modernized it. They kept the heavy state enterprises for the foundational sectors to ensure de facto control, but allowed fierce, cutthroat market competition in consumer goods and technology to generate the incredible wealth needed to fund the state apparatus, the hybrid.
That distinction is crucial for understanding how they actually operate today. All right, before we wrap this up, I want to reiterate something important. Today's discussion was meant solely to explore objective historical facts, political mechanisms, and logical frameworks. We aren't here to criticize or discriminate against any country, group, or people.
Definitely not.
Our core mission here is to advocate for independent, critical thinking. We want you to look at the history and understand why things happen.
Knowledge requires context, and history is rarely black and white.
Exactly. Also, since geopolitics frequently bumps into global markets and macroeconomics, a quick reminder: we are not financial advisors. Any macro trends we discuss today are strictly for your intellectual reference, not investment advice.
Keep your portfolios out of our history lessons.
Seriously. But I do want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. We spent a lot of time talking about those 3 pillars of legitimacy, right? For decades now, this regime has successfully validated its revolutionary past through absolute de facto control and explosive, unprecedented economic success. But what happens to that legitimacy if the economic engine ever truly stalls?
That is the big question. If the unspoken social contract of constant upward economic mobility is broken, which of those 3 logics do they fall back on?
It's the ultimate stress test for any system and something to seriously mull over as you watch the news. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. Please make sure to subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your audio. And we want to give a massive shout out to our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickey to Life. Go check out his latest travel vlogs. He's a great guy. And the videos are absolutely incredible.
They really are. Definitely go watch his new stuff.
All right, everyone, stay curious, and we will see you next episode. Don't go anywhere just yet. We've added a crucial thought experiment supplement to round out this discussion, and we're jumping right into it. Check it out.
Well, we are tackling this massive thought experiment from our listener mail, and it basically takes this whole concept of dynastic succession and legal continuity and just, pushes it right to the absolute edge until it breaks.
Yes, I love this one. It is a massive logical trap. We are looking at this theoretical scenario that really exposes the the fragility of how regimes justify their power.
Exactly. I mean, it makes you think about how we do things here, right? Like when Washington passes some new tech regulation or when we formulate foreign policy, we rely on this unbroken, stable constitutional foundation.
Right. It's not just based on, like, whoever won the latest civil war.
Exactly. But imagine if a government justified its entire existence strictly through a historical armed rebellion. What happens when a new group tries to use that exact same excuse today?
It creates a complete logical black hole. So, this hypothetical we are analyzing today imagines a brand new faction popping up in China right now. Let's call them the Little Pig Party.
The Little Pig Party. I love that so much.
Right. And their whole strategy is to just perfectly copy the historical armed revolution playbook to overthrow the current system.
So they are like using the exact same logic the current system used to gain power back in the 1930s, which leads to these three ultimate questions.
Yeah, the Little Pig Party's three questions. Should we just role play this out to really unpack?
I am so down for this.
Yeah.
I will play the cold, calculating rebel of the Little Pig Party.
Okay, and I will be the, flustered traditional defender of the official narrative. Hit me.
All right, so question one, the Genesis paradox. Back in 1931, the establishment of the Chinese Soviet Republic in Ruijin, complete with its own currency, its own constitution, that is celebrated today as a righteous, glorious revolution.
Right.
So why is it that when my Little Pig Party forms a breakaway republic today, it is suddenly condemned as, like, instant treason?
Well, you see, 1931 was a special historical period. The previous government was corrupt and failing, making our revolution legally and morally justified. But today, our nation is strong and providing for its people, so your division is illegal.
Wait. Temporal exceptionalism. Who actually holds the remote control for defining a special historical period?
And stepping out of character for a second, that is exactly where the double standard kicks in.
Right. Because, I mean, the guys in the 1930s definitely didn't think they were failing. So if citizens are unhappy today, can my rebels not just declare that right now is a special period?
Yeah, the current system is essentially trying to weld the door shut behind them, basically saying, we were legally allowed to rebel against our predecessors, but you aren't allowed to rebel against us.
Which brings up question three, the absolute checkmate.
Back in character, we won because we had the support of the people. That proves we were right.
Okay, so separatism isn't actually a moral issue then. It just depends on who wins. Right, because if my Little Pig Party actually wins, doesn't the current system just get downgraded to the previous dynasty under your own winner-takes-all logic?
And scene. That is such a devastating point. It completely exposes the end of history illusion.
Yeah, you use the mandate of heaven where violence and victory legally justify regime change to get into power.
But then you demand eternal moral supremacy to stop anyone else from ever doing it again.
It is a wild double standard. It's like saying might makes right, but only when we do it.
Which honestly leaves you permanently vulnerable to whoever might be stronger tomorrow. You can't just magically make yourself immune to the next challenger by writing your past victories into the law.
Completely. It is a fascinating paradox, and it really shifts how you view international legal framework.
It really does.
Well, we'll leave you with this to chew on. If a government's legitimacy is based entirely on the historical fact of winning a war, how can any modern legal framework ever truly protect it against the next successful challenger?
Such a great question to end on.
For sure. Remember to subscribe to Sip and Talk, and hey, go check out our good buddy Mickey's YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, Mickey to Life, such a great channel.
Yeah, some awesome content on there. Thanks for hanging out with us, Sip and Talkers. See you next time.